Imagine for a moment that you are in an immense room, lit only by the flickering of 1,000 wax candles, where the scent of the most expensive French perfume mingles with the metallic smell of steel and the leather of military boots. We are in St. Petersburg in the year 1805. It is not just a place and a date, it is the epicenter of a human earthquake that is about to shake the foundations of all Western civilization. Welcome to a journey that seeks not only to tell a story, but to unravel the very fabric of human existence through what many consider the greatest novel ever written, War and Peace, by Leo Tolstoy. To understand the magnitude of this work, we must first understand the man who created it. Tolstoy was not simply a writer, he was a tireless seeker, an aristocrat who felt uncomfortable in his palaces, and a soldier who loathed violence but understood it with terrifying clarity. His life was a constant struggle between the desires of the flesh and the purity of the spirit, and that tension is the engine that drives every one of the 1,200 pages of his masterpiece. War and Peace is not a book about the past, it is a mirror reflecting our present, a psychological study that predates modern neuroscience, and a philosophical meditation on the role we play in the grand design of history. At this point in our exploration, it is essential to dive into the historical context that Tolstoy recreates with almost obsessive precision. We find ourselves in the Napoleonic Wars, a period where the map of Europe was being redrawn in blood by the military genius of Napoleon Bonaparte. For the Russian aristocracy of 1805, Napoleon was an ambivalent figure. On one hand, a monster threatening monarchical stability. On the other, an icon of modernity and progress. This contradiction is evident in the novel's opening scene at Anna Pavlovna Scherer's soirée, where nobles speak in French while discussing how to defeat the French. This linguistic and cultural irony is the first clue Tolstoy gives us regarding the disconnect between the elites and the reality of the Russian people. But to grasp the true essence of this narrative, we must move away from the drawing rooms and look toward the horizon, where troops are mobilizing for the Battle of Austerlitz, an event that would mark the beginning of the end of glory-filled illusions for an entire generation. This inevitably brings us to another crucial aspect: the characters who inhabit this literary cosmos. Tolstoy does not create archetypes, he creates breathing beings. Let's meet Pierre Bezukhov, perhaps the character closest to the author's heart. Pierre is a clumsy man, the illegitimate son of an immensely wealthy count, who suddenly finds himself with a massive inheritance and a title he does not know how to handle. Pierre is the quintessential spiritual seeker. His journey is that of a soul trying to find the purpose of life in Freemasonry, in marriage, in managing his lands, and finally in the horror of captivity. Opposite him, we have Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, Pierre's antithesis. Andrei is handsome, cynical, extremely intelligent, and deeply bored by the vacuity of high society. His quest for glory leads him to the front lines, seeking his own moment of Napoleonic heroism, only to discover that death is much simpler and quieter than history books suggest. But we cannot talk about Andrei and Pierre without mentioning the vital force that connects them both, Natasha Rostova. Natasha is in many ways the soul of Russia. At the beginning of the work, she is a girl full of contagious energy, a young woman who sings, dances, and loves with an intensity that defies any social convention. Through her, Tolstoy explores the transition from innocence to painful maturity. Natasha is not perfect. She makes devastating mistakes, allows herself to be seduced by appearances, and suffers the consequences of her impulses. However, her capacity for regeneration is what makes her the emotional center of gravity of the novel. The relationship between these three individuals forms a triangle that expands and contracts as the war advances toward the Russian borders. To fully understand this, we must look at the narrative deconstruction Tolstoy performs on the concept of heroism. In 1812, Napoleon invades Russia with the Grande Armée, the largest army ever seen up to that point. Conventional narrative would tell us this is a duel between great men, between Napoleon and the Russian general Kutuzov. But Tolstoy hated this view of history. For him, the idea of the great man is a dangerous illusion. He argues that historical events are not decided by leaders, but by the infinitesimal sum of the wills of thousands of individual soldiers, each acting according to their own fears and desires. Kutuzov, in Tolstoy's vision, is the true hero because he understands this. Kutuzov does not try to control the Battle of Borodino. He simply allows the spirit of the Russian army to act, knowing that victory depends not on a brilliant tactical order, but on the moral resilience of his men in the face of adversity. This perspective leads us to one of the most transcendental moments in literature, the wounded Andrei Bolkonsky gazing at the infinite sky of Austerlitz. As he lies on the ground, bleeding out, Andrei realizes that all his ambition, all his desire for glory, and all his hatred for Napoleon are insignificant compared to the vastness of the blue sky. This epiphany is a philosophical breaking point. Tolstoy is telling us that true peace is not found in the absence of war, but in the acceptance of our own smallness before the universe. It is a form of premature existentialism that challenges the rationalist logic of the French Enlightenment. The author uses war not as an end in itself, but as a laboratory of maximum stress where social masks fall away, leaving only the essence of the human being. If we delve into the symbolism of the work, we find that nature plays a determining role. The famous oak tree that Andrei sees at two different stages of his life symbolizes his own process of spiritual death and resurrection. In winter, the oak is dry and seems dead, reflecting Andrei's cynicism. In spring, the oak blooms against all odds, reminding him that life always finds a way, even after the darkest tragedies. Similarly, the fire of Moscow is not just a historical disaster, it is a purification by fire. The Muscovites prefer to burn their own city rather than surrender it to Napoleon, an act of collective sacrifice that destroys the material to save the spiritual. But to understand the magnitude of this work in its entirety, we must also consider the treatment of time. Tolstoy does not write a linear chronicle, but uses a technique we might call polyphonic narration. We jump from the intimacy of a bedroom where a mother cries for her son to the thunder of cannons tearing bodies apart on the battlefield. This oscillation between the micro and the macro creates a sense of vertigo. Narrative experts have noted that this style anticipates cinematic techniques like parallel editing. The author forces us to see that every individual decision, however small, such as Natasha's flirtation with Anatoly Kuragin, has repercussions that intertwine with the fate of an entire nation. The psychological deconstruction Tolstoy performs is so deep that even today, in the 21st century, it continues to amaze us. Take, for example, the character of Nikolai Rostov, Natasha's brother. Nikolai is an ordinary man, neither very brilliant nor very wicked, who gets caught up in the excitement of war. Through him, Tolstoy analyzes crowd psychology and how patriotic enthusiasm can cloud moral judgment. Nikolai discovers that killing a man is not a glorious act but something strange and confusing. The description of his first encounter with the enemy is masterful. He feels no hatred, only bewilderment at seeing that the French soldier he is chasing has a human face, full of fear just like his own. This human approach strips war of its romanticism and shows it as an absurd tragedy driven by a lack of communication and the selfishness of elites. This inevitably leads to another crucial aspect of Tolstoy's philosophy, his theory of history, which he develops extensively in the novel's epilogues. Many readers skip these sections because they seem like dense essays, but they are the intellectual heart of the book. Tolstoy proposes that human freedom is an illusion proportional to our knowledge. The more we know about the causes of an event, the less free it seems to us. If we drop a stone, we know it will fall due to gravity, not because it is free to do so. According to Tolstoy, human actions are subject to laws that we do not yet fully understand, but which operate with the same inevitability as the laws of physics. This idea that we are tiny threads in an immense tapestry is terrifying and at the same time strangely comforting, as it removes the weight of individual arrogance. We cannot overlook the role of women in War and Peace. Although Tolstoy has been criticized for his sometimes conservative views, his female characters possess immense psychological depth. Maria Bolkonskaya, Andrei's sister, represents long-suffering holiness and the strength of faith. Her internal struggle between duty to her tyrannical father and her desire for a life of her own is treated with extreme delicacy. Maria does not seek glory on the battlefield, but in daily sacrifice and compassion. Through her and Natasha, Tolstoy presents a model of domestic heroism that is as vital to the survival of society as the military exploits of men. The peace in the title refers not only to the absence of armed conflict, but to harmony within the family and the individual soul. But how does all this connect with our modern reality? In an era dominated by algorithms and big data, Tolstoy's vision of history has never been more relevant. Today we talk about complex systems and how small variables can generate large changes, something commonly known as the butterfly effect. Tolstoy was already describing this in 1869. He understood that reality is too complex to be directed by a single individual, whether an emperor or a CEO of a tech company. His warning against the cult of personality resonates strongly today, reminding us that true change emerges from the ground up, from the everyday actions of anonymous people. Furthermore, the psychology of attention that Tolstoy explores is strikingly similar to the findings of contemporary neuroscience. When Andrei is on the battlefield, his perception of time and space changes. Tolstoy describes the state of flow and sensory collapse in a way that modern psychologists would instantly recognize. The author understood that our minds filter reality based on our emotional needs. Pierre Bezukhov, in his moment of greatest despair as a prisoner of the French, discovers that happiness does not depend on external circumstances, but on internal disposition. This is a fundamental lesson of current positive psychology. Resilience is not the absence of suffering, but the ability to find meaning within it. Looking at the legacy of War and Peace, we see its footprint throughout pop culture and subsequent literature. From the great family sagas in modern television to the cinematic epics that try to capture the scale of war, all drink from Tolstoy's well. The technique of intertwining intimate personal stories with global-scale historical events is the gold standard of epic narrative. But beyond the technique, what endures is the author's brutal honesty. Tolstoy does not offer us easy solutions. There is no conventional happy ending where all problems are resolved. Life goes on with its joys and its mournings, its births and its deaths. To fully understand this, we must look toward the end of the novel, where we see the surviving characters trying to build a normal life after the storm. Pierre and Natasha marry and start a family. Some critics have found this ending disappointing, calling it mundane. But therein lies Tolstoy's genius. He tells us that after the glory of battles and the depth of philosophical epiphanies, what remains is the simplicity of daily life. True wisdom does not consist in reaching a state of permanent enlightenment, but in knowing how to raise a child, tend to a land, and love another person with all their imperfections. Peace is not a static destination, it is a daily practice. The relevance of War and Peace also extends to our relationship with technology and information. In a world where we are bombarded by news and narratives that try to simplify reality into good and evil, Tolstoy forces us to embrace complexity. No one in his novel is purely evil or purely good. Even Napoleon, whom Tolstoy criticizes harshly, is portrayed as a man trapped in his own vanity, a victim of the circumstances he believes he controls. This ability to feel empathy for the enemy is one of the most urgent lessons we need to learn today. As conflict resolution experts would say, peace begins when we stop seeing the other as an abstraction and start seeing them as a human being with fears and desires similar to our own. Even in terms of sustainability and our relationship with the environment, Tolstoy has something to tell us. His love for the Russian land, for the forests and fields, is not just nationalism, it is a deep connection with the organic. In a famous scene, Nikolai Rostov loses himself in the joy of a hunt, feeling an almost mystical connection with animals and nature. Tolstoy warns us that when we move away from the natural rhythms of life to shut ourselves in the parlors of social artificiality or the cold logic of mechanized war, we lose our souls. This message resonates with modern ecological movements that seek a return to the essential and the authentic. At this point in our reflection, we must address the question of why we continue to read this massive book after more than 150 years. The answer is that War and Peace is one of the few works that manages to capture the totality of the human experience. It is a book that grows with the reader. If you read it in your 20s, you will identify with Natasha's passion and Andrei's ambition. If you read it in your 40s, you will better understand Pierre's struggles and Nikolai's responsibilities. If you read it in your 60s, you will see in the figure of Kutuzov a metaphor for the acceptance and wisdom that only time grants. It is a circular work that feels new with every reading because we as human beings are always changing. But for this exploration to be complete, we must consider the impact of the author in his own time. Tolstoy wrote War and Peace at a time of great turmoil in Russia, shortly after the abolition of serfdom. The book was an attempt to give Russians a national identity based not on the imitation of Europe, but on their own roots and their capacity for resilience. However, its message transcended Russia's borders because it spoke of universal themes: love, death, power, and the search for God. Philosophers like Martin Heidegger or psychologists like Sigmund Freud found deep insights in Tolstoy's pages about existential angst and the impulses of the unconscious. Reaching the final stretch of this analysis, it is vital to emphasize that War and Peace is not a work to be consumed quickly. It demands time, it demands patience, and it demands that the reader be willing to lose themselves in its pages. In our world of instant gratification and few-second videos, dedicating hours to following the reflections of a 19th century Russian aristocrat is an act of intellectual rebellion. It is an invitation to slow down and contemplate life with the seriousness and wonder it deserves. Tolstoy teaches us that nothing is small, that a sigh in a dark room can have as much historical weight as the movement of an army of 100,000 men. The true greatness of this epic lies in its ability to remind us of our shared humanity. Despite the temporal, geographical, and cultural distances, Pierre Bezukhov's dilemmas are our dilemmas. We all seek a purpose, we all make mistakes out of pride, and we all, at some point, have felt lost before the immensity of fate. Tolstoy does not give us a definitive answer about the meaning of life, but he shows us that the search itself is what makes us human. The struggle between external war and internal peace is the story of every individual who has walked the earth. As we close this chapter of our deep reflection, let's look back one last time at that sky of Austerlitz that so impacted Prince Andrei. That sky represents the absolute truth that lies beyond our political disputes and our material concerns. War and Peace ends not with a war cry, but with the murmur of daily life that persists despite everything. It is a reminder that, although the world sometimes seems to be falling into chaos and violence, there is an underlying force of love and renewal that never runs out. Through the thousands of words that make up this script, we have tried to capture only a fraction of the light that emanates from Tolstoy's work. I hope this journey has inspired you to open those pages, or to return to them with a renewed gaze, to discover for yourself why, as long as there are human beings on Earth, war and peace will remain the definitive chronicle of our species. The journey of Pierre, Andrei, and Natasha is ultimately the journey of all of us toward understanding what it means to be alive. Thank you very much for joining me in this extensive and detailed analysis of one of the peaks of the human spirit. May the search for your own peace be as deep and revealing as that of Leo Tolstoy's characters. See you in the next literary exploration.